Can you point out to me or give me an example of something you find spiritual?
Okay. Let's say the art of bondage.
Okay.
Okay, in the way that, let's say from Japanese tradition, the way the art of actually tying up and working with ropes. It's almost similar to the mandalas and to some of the ancient rituals that you would see in some of the old religions, because there's so much passion into it, and there's so much like art put into it in the way it's made, that I could almost see a parallel with some of the rituals. I see it very ritualistic. That's the way I see it. And I think that it's each, with their own, soul. Like, if someone's putting passion and doesn't see evil in what they're doing, it cannot be evil. I think that guilt is the real form of evil, and that it's all a question of perspective. And that there's an ongoing relationship with the Creator that's one-on-one with every human being, and that there's no other human being that should come and say, hey, this is wrong or this is not, And we learned that in the first phrase of in the beginning of the Old Testament, because we say God created man to His own image. It doesn't mean that man was made physically like God. It means that man is like God in the sense that he's got a relationship that's unique with Him, And inside each man, there's the miracle of the whole creation of the universe. And in that sense, I think that, it's all a question of perspective.
Have you ever been on the receiving end of someone saying to you, you should not be doing what you're doing, or you should not be associating with certain people because they're bad?
Yeah, it has happened. It has happened, and I've answered that, a lot of these people that are actually saying that have a secret life and are doing stuff that are on the perverted end, let's say, and they just hide it. And, in comparison to that, some people in these communities are so cool with it and so open, and there's no conflict. So I think that these people are more sane. So that's what I've been answering.
Let's talk about your record label.
Sure.
Give me the name, when you set it up, why you set it up.
Okay, it's called Golem Records.
How do you spell that?
Golem. A golem is a creature in the folklore, Judeo-Christian again, and even like in early like Chaldean and Sumerian, you can find references to that. It's a man that's created by another man with the same process as the process that God used to create man out of clay. So using meditation and secret names and permutation of names of God, some wise man or sage or sorcerer would be able to create life. So a golem is a man-made creature that's almost perfect, but it's not, because man cannot create a perfect human. And that gave the background to the story of Frankenstein, for instance. So Golem Records is the concept of doing a record label that's using technology but remains man-made, remains, still, a hybrid with new technology and traditional musical approach, and it makes it, finding a way to combine both ends,
Now, you could have just done this as an artist. Why start a record label?
Because I've always been producing, and like competition is so big, and that if you're waiting for the majors to do something with your art, then you can spend your life, in your living room, And so I just decided to, after doing a couple of recordings and seeing the reaction, I decided to become, self-reliable and just actually pushing my stuff. And with the internet, it was better and it was easier. So that's why I started that project. That record label.
And under the record label, do you distribute anything? Do you mass produce?
We started some, but it's in the process of being right now. So it's not really distributed worldwide for now, except for the net. And but we are looking at some possibilities to export more, and But as I said, the internet already does a lot of work on that side, because people could visit the website from wherever they are and actually, be turned on to the material and send feedback and, all that stuff.
Let's talk about your website.
Sure.
What's your website name, and from the time I arrive there, what can I expect to find?
Okay, so it's www.golemrecords.com, and it's basically the site for the record label. So it's a portal where you have news on different artists that are actually working on Golem Records, and you can browse and listen to musical excerpts, and you could see the different implication with communities, and different artists are doing what and doing events for this or for that, and you keep always an update, and you can browse to like history and lyrics and discography and all that stuff. So that's what the website is about, basically.
Now let's go back to your education in theology.
Yes.
I'm wondering, given that you have a passion for music, you went so far as to start your own record label, working on different music projects, why not have an education that is music related rather than an education in theology?
Well, I guess it has to do with the path of every soul, but it's an interesting question, because what I did realize in music is that passion is one thing and technicality is another. I've met so many great musicians that had studied their whole life and were telling me, I can play, but it's hard to create original stuff. And did you study? And I'm like, yeah, I did my share of studying in music, but not as much as you. But I find that it brings barriers when you know too much and you sink into the technicality of stuff, because it's never good enough. If you look in the history of music, you have, like, for instance, a band like the Sex Pistols, which were not really classically trained, which they did a big impact, And then you have other jazz musicians that are amazing and that you never hear about them, So that's always the example I like to give, It's good to have that kind of spontaneous, kind of spur of the moment attitude with music, like with different kinds of arts as well,
So what training in music did you actually have?
Well, I I studied a basic classical formation without going in depth, and I learned bass with a bluesman for a couple of years, and then I was working in a bit of the hip hop scene, but in the early '80s, not the hip hop as we know it today. So back then was like the using of drum machines and the beginning of looping and all that stuff. So I got turned on to that aspect of technology back then, and kept on practicing and working, and had some vocal lessons for a couple of years as well with a very known singer in Montreal, and just polished my art through the years, basically.
And you were doing this while you were DJing and studying theology?
Yeah, exactly.
And did anybody, throughout the time that you were doing this, did anybody else ever question you, like, why don't you just study music?
Yeah, I guess so, but a couple of people had mentioned that to me, but being a bit of a rebel in my own way, I think that if I would have studied music, as intensive as some people do, maybe I would not have been so much turned on to, because it's a reward for me, it's something that's very very free, very no boundaries, when I do music. So perhaps if I would have been, immersed in the whole academic side of it, then maybe it would not have been the same result,
So if I understand this correctly, you made a conscious decision not to educate yourself full-time in music so that you could enjoy it more.
Yeah, it's not like I decided that before starting. It's just like, I was studying theology and I had this passion for music, and, like a yin and yang thing, I started, continuing both aspects, and at one point when the music was sounding good and had something, I just said, okay, I'm going to get into it. But I mean, I would lie if I would say I didn't spend hours and nights, working and studying on different, the aspects of technology and, studio recording and engineering and stuff like that. So I did learn, but not in a non-academic environment, definitely.